My husband celebrated the day he stole my CEO position by bringing his mistress, the chairman's daughter, into our home and sleeping with her in our bed. He used my mind, my work, and my trust to meticulously plan my downfall, thinking I would just break down and disappear after he stole my CEO position. He thought the game was over. What he didn't understand is that the woman whose mind was sharp enough to build an empire for him was also sharp enough to build a bigger one on his ruins. He thought the story ended the moment he stole my CEO position. But really, that's where my story of revenge began. If you believe revenge is a dish best served in the boardroom, hit that subscribe button because I'm about to show you how I took back everything he stole and more. My story begins with the cold, sterile glow of a computer screen. The subject line was just 2 words: corporate restructuring. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was Eleanor Vance, 38 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, the Senior Vice President of Strategy at Sterling Financial Technologies. For the last 5 years, my husband Marcus and I had been the firm's power couple, 2 halves of one brilliant, ambitious whole. Or so I thought. The email was short, brutal, and full of corporate jargon that all meant one thing: I was out. My position was redundant. Effective immediately. Redundant. I was the architect of the 5-year plan that had tripled the company's value. I was the one who had just handed Marcus the keys to the kingdom on a silver platter, a groundbreaking strategy I'd designed for the vacant CEO spot. A role he was just announced to have won this morning. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He didn't just get the promotion we had both been working towards. He stole my CEO position, using my work, my ideas. The air left my lungs. I stumbled out of the office building into the unforgiving New York City rain. The sky was a bruised purple, and the downpour felt like the city itself was weeping for my stupidity. All I wanted was to get home, to confront him, to hear him say it was all a grotesque misunderstanding. I needed to look in his eyes and find the man I married, not this monster. As I fumbled for my keys at the door of our brownstone, soaked and shivering, a sound drifted from upstairs. It was a woman's laughter, high-pitched, carefree, and definitely not mine. It was coming from our bedroom. For a second, I couldn't move. My hand was frozen on the cold brass doorknob, my trench coat dripping rainwater onto the pristine hardwood floor. It was the sound, that specific, carefree laughter. It wasn't just a sound. It was a key, unlocking a series of dark rooms in my memory I hadn't dared to enter before. They say your life flashes before your eyes before you die. For me, the last year of my marriage flashed before my eyes in the 10 seconds I stood paralyzed in that hallway. It's funny how red flags just look like flags when you're wearing rose-colored glasses. The first image that hit me was from 6 months ago. Marcus and I were in our home office. I was panicking because a key research file for a preliminary presentation had somehow been corrupted. I was a mess, convinced I'd have to pull 3 all-nighters to fix it. Marcus had wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Hey, don't worry," he'd soothed, his voice a balm on my frayed nerves. "We'll figure it out. I'll stay up with you. We're a team. Remember?" He'd been so convincing, so supportive. I saw it so clearly now, the brief, almost imperceptible flicker of something other than sympathy in his eyes. It wasn't concern. It was assessment. He was testing me, seeing how I'd react to a crisis he likely created. Then came the memories of the late nights that followed, the ones spent mapping out my entire vision for the CEO role, The whiteboard in our office was covered in my frantic handwriting, a constellation of market projections, personnel shifts, and innovative tech integrations. I thought we were brainstorming, but now I replayed those conversations in my head. He wasn't contributing, he was extracting. He'd circle one of my ideas and say, "This is brilliant. Ellie, tell me more about the rollout phase." He made me feel like a genius, like we were an unstoppable force, all while he was simply mining my intellect, pocketing every gem for himself. He was a thief in husband's clothing, and I had handed him the blueprints and the key to the vault. I had practically begged him to rob me blind. And then, the final, sickening piece of the puzzle clicked into place. That laugh. I knew that laugh. It belonged to Chloe Sterling, the chairman's 26-year-old daughter, a woman whose only notable achievement was her trust fund. I remembered the annual charity gala last spring. I had felt a pang of annoyance watching Marcus charm her, laughing way too hard at her vapid stories. When I'd mentioned it later, he just rolled his eyes. "Oh, Ellie, it's just networking. You have to play the game. I'm doing this for us." He'd made me feel small and jealous for questioning him, but it wasn't just networking, it was an investment. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was securing his flank, ensuring that when he made his move, he had the one ally who could make him untouchable. The affair wasn't about passion, it was a leveraged buyout of our marriage. Every whispered sweet nothing, every shared dream. It was all just due diligence for his grand betrayal. Standing there, dripping water in the hallway of the home my work had paid for, the fog of love and trust finally evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp and cold it burned. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a conspiracy. And I had been sleeping with the enemy for years. The shock that had hollowed me out just an hour ago was now solidifying into something else, something hard and heavy in my chest. It was rage, pure, undiluted, and for the first time in a very long time, it was all my own. Before the rage, there was the dream, and as I stood there, a ghost in my own home, my mind couldn't help but resurrect its beautiful, treacherous corpse. It was the grand plan, as Marcus and I had called it. The name started as a joke, whispered over a celebratory bottle of expensive wine the night our former CEO, Mr. Sterling, announced his retirement. "This is it, Ellie," Marcus had said, his eyes gleaming with an ambition I mistook for shared passion. "This is our shot, the Vance and Thorne era." He always put my name first when he was trying to sell me something. That night, we mapped out our future on a cocktail napkin. It was a future built entirely on the back of my strategy. I knew the company's DNA better than anyone. I'd spent years dissecting its inefficiencies, identifying growth sectors, and building the financial models that everyone else thought were impossible. Marcus? Well, Marcus was handsome. He was charming. He could command a room and make a board of old. Cynical men feel like they were part of a revolution. He was the perfect salesman, and I was the perfect product. I just didn't realize he was planning to sell me out. For the next 8 months, the grand plan became my entire world. It consumed me. I didn't just work on it. I metabolized it. Our guest room became a war room. The walls papered with flowcharts and market analyses, all in my handwriting. I lived on lukewarm coffee and takeout sushi, eaten hunched over my laptop. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My dreams filled with spreadsheets and stock projections. I remember canceling our anniversary trip to Napa. Marcus had put on a great show of being disappointed. "Are you sure, babe?" he'd asked, feigning concern. "We need a break." But when I insisted the plan had to come first, a flicker of relief crossed his face so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. He wasn't disappointed. He was pleased that his primary asset was still working at full capacity. I even gave up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a guest fellowship at Columbia Business School, a chance to teach and write, a personal dream I'd held for years. Marcus had been so cunning in how he convinced me to turn it down. He framed it as our sacrifice. "Ellie, you're a genius. They know it. We know it," he'd said, holding my hands. "But just think, if we can land this, you can write your own ticket. You could endow a whole department at Columbia. Just a little more focus, a few more months of grinding for us." He made my dream feel like a frivolous distraction from our glorious destiny. The truth is, he couldn't afford to have me building a reputation and a network independent of him. He needed me isolated. He needed me focused on forging the weapon he planned to use against me. And all through this process, he played the part of the supportive husband flawlessly. He'd bring me a blanket when I'd fall asleep at my desk. He'd rub my shoulders, whispering, "You're incredible. I'm just the lucky guy who gets to present your brilliance to the world." That line should have been the biggest red flag of all. He wasn't hiding his intentions. He was confessing them in plain sight, cloaking the theft in the language of admiration. I thought he was my biggest cheerleader, but he was just my warden, making sure I stayed in my beautiful prison long enough to finish the work. The final memory that surfaced was the most painful, the night before the presentation. We were in the war room, the final slide deck glowing on the monitor. I was delirious with exhaustion and pride. I walked him through it one last time, my voice buzzing with excitement. "And when we implement this, Marcus, the Q4 profits will be astronomical." I was talking a mile a minute, painting a picture of the empire we would build. I finally turned to him, expecting to see that same fire in his eyes. Instead, he was just watching me with a strange, quiet intensity. I thought it was love. I thought it was awe. How could I have been so blind, standing in my hallway, drenched and betrayed? I finally understood what that look was. It wasn't the look of a partner. It was the look a chess master gives his queen just before he sacrifices her to win the game. It was the look of a man saying goodbye. That final memory didn't just flicker and die. It ignited the fuse. Every doubt, every suppressed instinct, every whispered worry I had dismissed as paranoia. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. I had been played. Beautifully, masterfully, and completely. The love story of my life was, in fact, the longest con I had ever known, and the man I had given my soul to was nothing more than a predator who saw my heart as a stepping stone. My feet, suddenly feeling like lead, began to move. One step, then another, across the marble floor of the foyer, leaving a trail of rainwater like muddy tears. My hand, no longer trembling, closed around the handle of the master bedroom door. There was no plan in my mind, no script. There was only a cold, hollow certainty. The life I had known was already over. I was just walking toward the wreckage. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open. The scene inside was a perfect, vulgar tableau of my destruction. The room, decorated in cool grays and blues that I had chosen, was cast in the warm, intimate glow of the bedside lamps. An empty bottle of Veuve Clicquot, our celebration champagne, was sweating onto my antique nightstand. And there, tangled in the 1,000-thread count Egyptian cotton sheets that I had bought, were Marcus and Chloe Sterling. She was wearing my white silk robe, the one he'd given me for my last birthday. The casual intimacy of that detail felt like a separate, deliberate violation. They both looked up, their laughter cut short. Chloe had the decency to look momentarily startled, pulling the sheet up to her chin. But Marcus? Marcus didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. Annoyed that I was interrupting. He propped himself up on one elbow, his perfectly sculpted hair barely out of place. "Ellie, what are you doing home?" he asked, his voice laced with the kind of casual irritation he usually reserved for a delayed dinner reservation. My own voice, when it came out, was terrifyingly steady. All the grief and shock had been super-cooled into something that felt like ice. "I was fired today. Marcus." He had the audacity to feign surprise. "What? Oh my God, honey. I'm so sorry. Save it." I cut him off. My eyes didn't leave his. "I want to say congratulations, though, Mr. CEO. You must be celebrating your new promotion?" A flicker of something fear maybe danced in his eyes before being replaced by that familiar, arrogant smirk. He sat up fully, letting the sheet fall to his lap. He wasn't going to hide. He was going to perform. "It was a bloodbath," he said, shaking his head as if he were a weary soldier. "The board was ruthless. They wanted a complete change in direction. Your role, it just wasn't part of the new vision." "My role?" I let out a laugh, a dry, humorless sound. "My vision. You mean the one you presented this morning as your own." Chloe, who had been watching us like a tennis match, finally spoke. "Don't be so dramatic," she drawled, examining her nails. "Daddy said the company needs a real leader, not a backroom strategist. Marcus is a leader." The condescension in her voice was the final straw. "A leader," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Or a parasite, the kind who latches onto a host, drains them of everything they have, and then leaves the empty shell behind." Marcus finally dropped the act. His face hardened. "You're being hysterical. Eleanor, that plan was a team effort, and you know it? You got emotional, you got stuck in the weeds. I took our foundation and made it viable." "Our foundation." I took a step into the room, the scent of champagne and cheap perfume assaulting me. There was no our, there was me, working 18-hour days for 8 months. There was me, turning down my own dreams for what I thought was our future. And there was you pathetic fraud, cheering me on from the sidelines while you plotted to steal it all, while you were sleeping with her to secure your vote with her father. He actually laughed. A cold, dismissive sound that echoed in the silent room. "Oh, Ellie, you still don't get it. Do you?" He stood up, completely naked and completely unashamed, and walked towards the dresser. "You were never going to be CEO. You don't have the stomach for it. You think a brilliant idea is enough. But the world, the real world, isn't run by ideas. It's run by people willing to do whatever it takes to win." He pulled on a pair of boxers, his movements calm, deliberate. "You built a beautiful, intricate ladder, my love. I'll give you that. But you were always meant to be the ladder, not the one who climbs it. A good leader knows when to kick the ladder away once they've reached the top." The air was sucked from my lungs. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a complete and utter negation of my entire existence. My contributions, my love, my sacrifices, they were nothing to him. I was a tool, an efficient, intelligent, and now obsolete tool. It was never our dream. Ellie, he said, his voice soft, which was somehow more brutal than shouting. It was my ambition, and you were the best resource I had to achieve it. But resources, as you know, can always be reallocated. I just stared at him, the man I thought I knew, and saw a complete stranger, a monster wearing my husband's face. The ice in my veins began to spread, numbing everything. The pain was still there, a massive black hole inside me, but it was distant now. I felt a strange, chilling sense of peace. The peace that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. I turned without another word and walked out of the room. As I reached the top of the stairs, his voice called after me, a final twist of the knife. "Have your things packed and out by noon tomorrow," he said, his tone bored, as if discussing a delivery. "Chloe's not a fan of the decor. She'll be redoing the whole place." I didn't look back. I walked down the stairs, out the front door, and back into the cleansing rain. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had left me with nothing. He was wrong. He had left me with a purpose, and a rage that was about to burn his entire world to the ground. The first 48 hours after I walked out of my home were a blur of numb, methodical survival. Rage is a powerful fuel, but it burns hot and fast. What's left in the ashes is a hollow, echoing silence. I found a sterile, anonymous hotel room near LaGuardia, the kind of place with art bolted to the walls and a Bible in the nightstand. It smelled of industrial-grade cleaner and quiet desperation. It was perfect. From that room, I dismantled my old life with the cold precision of a surgeon. My first call was to a divorce lawyer, a shark I'd once met at a fundraiser. Her voice on the phone was all business, no pity, which I was grateful for. I instructed her to file immediately on grounds of infidelity and to be merciless. My second call was to the bank, where I methodically froze every joint account and credit card I could. I had a small personal savings account, an emergency fund I'd kept since college. It wasn't much, maybe enough to last a month if I was careful. Watching the balance transfer on the banking app, seeing that small sum as the total monetary value of my life's work, was a unique kind of humiliation. I spent the next day in a fog, mechanically going through the motions. I packed the few things I had: 2 outfits, a laptop, my toiletries into a single carry-on bag. I tried to eat the tasteless continental breakfast in the hotel lobby. I scrolled through my phone, my thumb hovering over photos of Marcus and me in Italy on our wedding day, smiling at the camera like two people who had the whole world figured out. For a moment, a wave of grief so powerful it buckled my knees washed over me, the ghost of the man I loved, the life I thought I had. It was all there, taunting me. With trembling fingers, I selected every picture of us together and pressed delete. It felt less like an erasure and more like an exorcism. I needed to burn the ghosts before they burned me. On the third morning, just as I was starting to research studio apartments in Queens, a courier knocked on my door. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope with a heavy cardstock feel. There was no return address. My name, Eleanor Vance, was written across the front in elegant, looping calligraphy. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside wasn't a legal document or a letter. It was a single, ornately engraved invitation. The board of the Metropolitan Children's Fund cordially invites you to their annual Starlight Gala at the Plaza Hotel. A ticket for one. No note. No explanation. My first instinct was to laugh. It had to be a cruel joke. A sick prank orchestrated by Marcus or Chloe to rub salt in my very public wound. Who would invite a disgraced, unemployed, soon-to-be divorced woman to the most exclusive high society event of the year? I should have thrown it in the trash. But my strategic mind, the only part of me that still seemed to be functioning, kicked in. It wasn't a prank. It was a move. Someone was sending me a message, putting a piece on the chessboard, and after days of feeling like a powerless victim, the chance to be a player again, even in a game I didn't understand, was irresistible. I had nothing left to lose. So, I did something crazy. I took the last of my savings and went to a high-end consignment shop on the Upper East Side. I bought a dress, a severe, black, Tom Ford gown. It wasn't a dress for a party. It was armor. Walking into the grand ballroom at the plaza was like stepping onto another planet. The air hummed with the sound of 1,000 quiet conversations, punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes, crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, dripped light onto a sea of perfectly coiffed heads and glittering jewels. This had been my world. Tonight, I was an alien visiting it. The moment I entered, I felt the shift. A subtle ripple of awareness went through the room. A partner from a rival firm who had been walking toward me suddenly changed his trajectory. The wife of our former CFO, a woman I'd hosted a baby shower for, gave me a tight, pained smile before turning her back. I was radioactive. I was the living embodiment of the gossip that had surely been tearing through their social circles for the past 72 hours. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck. I saw them in clusters, whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting towards me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. To them, I was a tragedy, a cautionary tale. A few people were brave enough to approach me, their voices dripping with a cloying, false sympathy. "Eleanor, darling," one woman murmured, squeezing my arm. I heard what happened. "You are being so incredibly brave just showing up tonight." It wasn't a compliment. It was a public declaration of my status as a victim. I felt like an exhibit at the zoo, the scorned woman in her natural habitat. I was about to turn and flee, to retreat to the safety of my anonymous hotel room, when a voice, deep and calm and utterly devoid of pity, cut through the noise behind me. "Mrs. Vance, I was hoping you'd come." I turned. The man standing before me wasn't one of the preening peacocks of Wall Street. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the facade of the room. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored tuxedo, and he held himself with an aura of still, quiet power that made everyone else seem loud and frivolous. I knew who he was instantly, though we'd never met. Everyone knew him. Julian Croft, the phantom of the financial world, a reclusive, legendary investor who moved markets with a single phone call, a man who hadn't been photographed in a decade. He gestured towards a quiet, secluded alcove away from the crowd. "May I have a word?" he asked, though it felt less like a question and more like a gentle command. I nodded, dumbstruck, and followed him. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I was an observer at the Sterling board meeting 3 days ago," he said, his voice low. "An invited guest of the chairman." My blood ran cold. "The 5-point plan for restructuring the fintech division," he continued, watching me intently. "The use of an inverted risk hedging model to leverage the Asian market expansion. It was audacious and utterly brilliant." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. It was also most certainly not the work of Marcus Thorne. I stared at him, my throat too tight to speak. Ambition is a powerful engine, Mrs. Vance, he said, but Marcus's brand of ambition has always required a host. His recent, very public alliance with the Sterling family is not a secret to those who know where to look. I know what he did to you, both in the boardroom and in your home. He saw the shock on my face and clarified, I make it my business to know things, and I believe that talent like yours should not be discarded. It should be armed. He told me he had sent the invitation. He told me he admired my work from afar for years. Then he laid his cards on the table. I own a company, Phoenix Legacy Systems. It's an old tech firm, a dinosaur with good bones but no vision. It's failing. I need someone to burn it to the ground and rebuild a titan from the ashes. I need an architect. I need you. I was speechless. A job offer. Here now. But that's not all, he said, his gaze unwavering. In your current position, you are a victim in this town's narrative, a brilliant woman who was wronged. You will be pitied, but you will not be feared. And to do what I need you to do, you need to be feared. He leaned in slightly. I am proposing a partnership, a merger of sorts. I am a 58-year-old widower who requires a wife for social and business purposes. You are a woman who requires capital, infrastructure, and a name that commands immediate and unconditional respect. I am proposing a marriage of convenience, Mrs. Vance, a legally binding contract. As Eleanor Vance, you are a story of failure. As Eleanor Croft, you become a story of power. He held my gaze, his expression unreadable. The entire glittering, gossiping ballroom behind him faded away. He wasn't offering me a lifeline to my old world. He was offering me the chance to build a new one. He was offering me a shield. He was offering me a sword. And in that moment, looking at the faces of the people who had just written me off, I knew I was going to take it. He thought he was offering me a weapon, but I saw it for what it really was. He was offering me revenge. My I do was the quietest, most calculated business decision of my life. The ceremony took place not in a church or a lavish ballroom, but in a sterile, sunlit room at City Hall. There were no guests, no flowers, no tearful parents. Just me, Julian Croft, and 2 lawyers who served as witnesses. We signed a prenuptial agreement that was thicker than a phone book, a document that detailed the terms of our partnership with the cold precision of a corporate merger. I was granted the title of CEO of Phoenix Legacy Systems, a controlling interest in its future profits, and an operating budget that made my head spin. In return, I became Eleanor Croft, a name that, as Julian had predicted, functioned like a key to a city I had just been exiled from. Our wedding night was spent in separate wings of his cavernous Fifth Avenue penthouse, the silence between us as vast and deep as the city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. There was no pretense of romance. We were allies, not lovers, and we both had a war to win. The next morning, my new life began. Julian's driver dropped me off in front of a gray, monolithic building in the financial district. This was the headquarters of Phoenix Legacy Systems. The name was a cruel joke. The place wasn't a phoenix, it was a mausoleum. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and resignation. The technology was ancient. The decor was a depressing shade of beige, and the employees moved with the lethargic pace of people who were just counting down the days to retirement. This wasn't a company on the verge of collapse. This was a company that was already dead and hadn't had the decency to lie down yet. It was perfect. A blank slate. Ashes from which I could build whatever I wanted. My first act as CEO was to call an all-hands meeting in the dusty auditorium. I walked onto the stage and looked out at the sea of skeptical, tired faces. They were expecting a pep talk, a gentle transition. I gave them a revolution. In a speech that lasted less than 10 minutes, I fired the entire executive board and 70% of senior management. The gasps were audible. Then, I laid out my vision. Phoenix Legacy Systems is dead, I announced, my voice echoing in the stunned silence. This morning, we are founding a new company in its place. It will be called Vance Croft Technologies. We will not be in the business of maintaining legacy systems. We will be in the business of creating the future. Anyone who is not interested in that mission can collect their severance package on the way out. Anyone who is, your real work starts now. It was a bloodbath, but it was necessary. I needed soldiers, not retirees. From the ashes of that first day, I began to build my army. I promoted hungry, overlooked engineers from the company's lower ranks, people whose brilliant ideas had been suffocating under layers of bureaucracy for years. Their loyalty was immediate and absolute. Then, I went hunting. Armed with Julian's checkbook and my own reputation, I began poaching the brightest minds in the industry. My first calls were to my old team at Sterling, the data scientists and market analysts who knew Marcus was a fraud. One by one, they jumped ship, drawn by the promise of innovation and the unspoken thrill of mutiny. The next 6 months were a blur of controlled chaos and relentless creation. I didn't just give the office a facelift. I ripped out its soul and gave it a new one. The beige cubicles were torn down, replaced with open concept workspaces, collaborative hubs, and state-of-the-art labs. I was ruthless, demanding, and completely in my element. I worked 20-hour days, fueled by a cold, clean rage and an endless supply of black coffee. My mission was simple. I was going to build a product so superior to the one Marcus was now managing that it would make his stolen company obsolete overnight. I was taking my original plan, my grand plan, and I was putting it on steroids. Through it all, Julian was a constant, quiet presence. He never set foot in the office, never interfered. He was the silent, invisible force that made everything possible. Obstacles that would have taken me weeks to navigate at Sterling simply vanished. A zoning permit that was stuck in red tape would suddenly be approved. A critical piece of hardware that was back-ordered across the country would appear on our loading dock. He was my shield, allowing me to focus solely on being the sword. Our interactions were confined to late-night strategy sessions at the penthouse. We'd sit across from each other at his massive mahogany table, financial reports and blueprints spread between us, talking for hours about market disruption and growth trajectories. It was the most intellectually stimulating relationship I had ever been in. There was no flirtation, no personal talk. The intimacy was in the shared understanding, in the way he could finish my thought on a risk assessment model or anticipate my next strategic move. He wasn't looking at me like a wife, or even a woman. He was looking at me like an equal, a fellow predator. And that respect was more intoxicating than any romance I had ever known. One evening, after a particularly brutal week, a member of the old Phoenix board, one of the few Julian had insisted on keeping for continuity, tried to challenge one of my more aggressive budget allocations. He was patronizing, calling me young lady, before I could verbally eviscerate him. Julian, who had been listening on speakerphone, spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Walter," he said, "if you ever question Mrs. Croft's authority in front of her team again, I will personally see to it that the only board you'll be sitting on is the one at your local community garden. Is that understood?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. After that, no one ever questioned me again. Finally, the day came. 9 months after I had walked out of my old life, Vance Croft Technologies launched its flagship product, Aegis, a next-generation financial security platform that made Sterling's system look like a children's toy. The launch event was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, a sleek, aggressive statement to the entire industry. It was an overwhelming success. That night, the headlines started rolling in. Bloomberg Phoenix rises from the ashes as Vance Croft disrupts fintech. The Wall Street Journal is Sterling Financial facing an existential threat. I stood with Julian by the windows of the penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below. The news ticker on the financial channel was a beautiful thing, my name in lights next to plummeting stock numbers for Sterling Financial. He handed me a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. We stood in silence for a long time, just watching. The war had just begun, but the first decisive battle had been won. He raised his glass, not to me, but towards the distant lights of the Sterling Tower. "To the Queen," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with a new kind of warmth I hadn't heard before. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I saw something beyond respect in his eyes. It was genuine, unadulterated admiration, and for the first time in nearly a year, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't rage or ambition or grief. It was a fragile, dangerous, and utterly thrilling spark of hope. The old board at Sterling was terrified. The market was in a panic. And Marcus was finally starting to understand that I wasn't just coming for my career. I was coming for his crown. The day of the final checkmate dawned cold and gray, the New York sky the color of steel. For a year, I had been a ghost, a rumor, a force of nature tearing through the market. I was Mrs. Croft, the enigmatic head of Vance Croft Technologies, the woman who had single-handedly made Sterling Financial bleed. But that morning, as I stepped into the Sterling Tower, I was finally just Eleanor, and I was there to reclaim my name. The emergency shareholder meeting was held in the main boardroom on the 50th floor, the very room where my life's work had been stolen. The air was thick with tension. Marcus stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his face pale and drawn, trying to project a confidence he clearly didn't feel. He looked older, worn down by the relentless, invisible war I had been waging against him. The board members, including Chloe and her father, avoided his gaze, shuffling papers and staring at their phones. They knew they were on a sinking ship. They just didn't know who was about to take command. The doors swung open, and I walked in. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I wasn't on the agenda. Julian followed a step behind me, his presence a silent, gravitational force that pulled all the air and attention towards him. Marcus's face went from pale to ashen. He looked at me as if he'd seen a ghost. A man in a severe suit, Julian's lead counsel, stepped forward and addressed the room. His voice was calm, dispassionate, and utterly brutal. "Good morning," he said. "As of 8/1 UAOH, this morning, A controlling interest of Sterling Financial Technologies has been acquired by a private trust represented by Mr. Julian Croft. As the new majority shareholder, Mr. Croft has exercised his right to restructure the board. Your positions are dissolved. A new board has been appointed, effective immediately. He paused and turned his gaze to me. Please welcome your new chairwoman, Mrs. Eleanor Croft. Silence. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table where Marcus was still sitting, frozen in the chairman's seat. I didn't speak. I just stood there, looking down at him, letting him feel the full, crushing weight of his defeat. Finally, he seemed to shrink, and he pushed his chair back, standing aside. I took my place. My place. I looked at the shocked faces around the table. Good morning, I said, my voice steady and clear. Vance Croft Technologies is pleased to formalize our acquisition of this company. There will be a new era at Sterling, an era of integrity, of real innovation, and above all, of accountability. My eyes locked on Marcus. My first act as chairwoman, I continued, is to address a critical legacy issue of intellectual property theft that has put this company at enormous legal and financial risk. I slid a single, slim file across the polished table. In this file, you will find irrefutable, time-stamped evidence that the entire strategic plan this company has been operating under for the last year was authored by me, and me alone, prior to my illegal termination. It was stolen, verbatim, by the former CEO, Mr. Thorne. Another wave of shock. I wasn't done. You will also find documented evidence of Mr. Thorne's inappropriate relationship with a subordinate board member. I gave Chloe a brief, dismissive glance. A clear violation of corporate governance and a massive liability. The new board has reviewed this evidence. Marcus Thorne, you are fired for cause, effective immediately. Your severance, bonuses, and all stock options are forfeited. Security will now escort you from the building. That's when he finally broke. The mask of the confident CEO shattered, revealing the pathetic, terrified man underneath. Eleanor, you can't, he shrieked, his voice cracking. Please, it was a mistake. I loved you. He started to cry, fat, ugly tears rolling down his face. Don't do this to me. It's already done, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. 2 security guards entered and took him by the arms. He struggled, screaming my name, begging, his carefully constructed world unraveling in a storm of pathetic desperation. I simply watched until the doors closed behind him, plunging the room back into silence. Later that evening, Julian and I stood in my new office, the one that had been Marcus's, looking out at the city. The rain had stopped, and the sky was clear. He came to stand beside me, his hand gently covering mine on the cool glass of the window. It wasn't a gesture of ownership. It was a gesture of partnership. So, he said softly, what's next on the agenda? Madam Chairwoman. I turned to face him, the cold armor I had worn for a year finally beginning to melt away, and for the first time, I felt the warmth underneath. I looked into the eyes of this incredible man who hadn't saved me, but had given me the tools to save myself, and I gave him a smile that was genuine, hopeful, and entirely my own. I was thinking, I said, we could start with dinner. Just Eleanor and Julian. He smiled back, a real, unguarded smile. I'd like that, he said. My story started with a betrayal that nearly destroyed me, but it doesn't end there. It ends with me finding my power, my purpose, and a love built on respect, not deceit. It ends with the creation of the Vance Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women rebuild their careers after being pushed out by people like Marcus. If you have ever felt counted out, betrayed, or had your voice stolen, know this: your story isn't over. You are just waiting for the moment to write your own comeback. Hit that subscribe button right now and join a community of survivors who refuse to be silenced. We're not just sharing stories here. We are building an arsenal of strength, one comeback at a time. Like this video if you believe in the unbreakable power of reinvention. And tell me in the comments, what would your first act have been as the new chairwoman? Because your voice, your story, it matters here.